The morning shift at Harrison and Pine Cafe always began the same way. The hiss of the espresso machine, the rhythmic thud of grinders, and the warm scent of roasted beans drifting out to greet the first customers of the day. The cafe was a small but elegant corner shop tucked on a busy downtown street, where office workers lined up for their daily caffeine and comfort. Usually, mornings there felt like a calm dance, familiar, practiced, and timed to perfection. But that Wednesday morning was different. Something in the air felt off. The clouds hung low, gray and heavy, and the rain hadn't stopped since dawn. By 7 sharp, the other baristas were already at their stations. Cups stacked neatly. Registers ready. Music humming softly through the speakers. And just as the clock hit 7:15, the glass door swung open, letting in a gust of cold air and a drenched figure. It was Maya. Her hair clung to her cheeks, her shoes squeaked with every step, and her breath came in short bursts as if she had been running for blocks. She whispered a quick, "I'm so sorry," tied her apron in one swift motion, and began working without another word. Behind the counter, Mr. Cole, the new manager, looked up from his tablet. His jaw tightened. He had only been there for 2 months, but he had already built a reputation. Efficient, orderly, and strict to the point of fear. He came from a corporate coffee chain where rules were law, and the slightest delay was seen as a sign of weakness. Discipline, he often said in meetings, is the heartbeat of success. To him, lateness wasn't just unprofessional, it was disrespectful. From his glass-walled office, he watched Maya move between tables, serving with her usual care, greeting regulars by name. She had been with the cafe for 4 years, longer than anyone else. The customers adored her. Kids from the neighborhood called her the coffee lady with the smile. Even the grumpiest morning commuters softened when she handed them their orders with that same warmth. But that morning, she avoided eye contact, her hands shaking slightly as she poured steamed milk. Something in her looked broken. By 9, the rush had passed. The cafe was quiet again. Mr. Cole adjusted his tie and motioned for Maya to come in. She hesitated for a moment. Maybe she knew what was coming, but eventually walked into the glass cubicle, still wiping her hands on her apron. He didn't offer her a seat. He didn't ask if she was okay. He simply slid a paper across the desk, a form with bold letters that read, "Pay deduction, tardiness." His voice was cold, deliberate. "You've been late 3 times this month," he said, without looking up. "You know company policy. Deductions will apply effective immediately." For a moment, there was silence, just the faint hum of the espresso machine outside. Maya's eyes flicked over the paper. She didn't argue, didn't defend herself. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something, but the words never came. She just nodded slowly, the corners of her mouth lifting into a tired, polite smile, the kind of smile people wear when they've run out of strength. "I understand, sir," she said quietly. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. Then she placed the paper back on his desk, turned around, and walked out. Through the glass walls, Cole watched her return to the counter. She resumed work like nothing had happened, wiping tables, greeting customers, fixing drinks, but there was something haunting about the way she moved. Every gesture was careful, practiced, like someone walking on eggshells. Her co-workers, sensing the tension, avoided speaking about it, but their eyes followed her. At lunchtime, one of them, Eli, tried to cheer her up. "Don't take it too hard," he said softly. "You know how he is. He's just trying to look good to the owners." Maya smiled faintly but didn't reply. She simply said, "Everyone has their job to do," and went back to steaming milk. Cole overheard that from his office. Something about her tone unsettled him. He wanted to think she was being sarcastic, but it didn't sound like that. It sounded tired. That kind of tiredness that doesn't come from a long day, but from a long life. When the shift ended, and the lights dimmed, Maya stayed behind to clean. She scrubbed the counters, washed the last of the mugs, and rearranged the syrup bottles. Small, precise tasks that helped her stay composed. By the time she finally untied her apron, it was almost dark. She glanced across the street, to the building with glowing red letters, St. Clair's Hospital. Her face softened. Then she stepped into the rain, pulling her coat tighter, and disappeared across the road. Cole watched her go. He didn't know why. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe guilt. He stood by the window long after she was gone, replaying her quiet, "I understand, sir," in his head. It sounded different now. Less obedient. More like resignation, the kind that comes from carrying a weight no one sees. The next morning, when he saw her coming in at 7:20 again, he felt the same irritation rising. But this time, when he noticed the faint hospital wristband still clinging to her wrist, half hidden under her sleeve, something inside him shifted. He didn't say anything. Not yet. But for the first time, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was a story behind her lateness that he had never bothered to ask. And as she moved through the cafe, humming softly under her breath while the morning light spilled through the windows, the man obsessed with rules began to realize that sometimes, the things that make us late are the same things that make us human. The rest of the day moved slowly, weighed down by an invisible heaviness. Though the cafe was filled with the familiar sounds of steaming milk, clinking cups, and soft chatter, something about the air felt off, like a song that had lost its rhythm. Maya stood behind the counter, her hair tied back neatly, her apron spotless as always. She smiled at every customer, scribbled cheerful hearts on their takeaway cups, and asked about their day as if nothing was wrong. But anyone who looked closely could see it, a kind of exhaustion that didn't come from lack of sleep but from carrying too much for too long. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. Her co-workers noticed. They whispered among themselves, wondering why she hadn't taken a real break in weeks. Eli, the youngest of the group, leaned toward another barista and muttered, "She's been off lately. Still sweet as ever, but I think something's eating her up inside." The other nodded but said nothing. No one dared ask Maya directly. She wasn't the type to talk about herself. She kept her world small, her work, her customers, her quiet goodbyes at the end of each shift. Inside his glass cubicle, Mr. Cole kept an eye on the floor. From behind his desk, Maya looked like every other employee. Efficient, quiet, replaceable. To him, lateness was a disease that spread if not punished. He had built his career on order and timing, rising from trainee to manager by being the first to arrive and the last to leave. In his mind, anyone who couldn't do the same didn't deserve sympathy. Rules, he once said in a staff meeting, exist for a reason, to separate the serious from the slackers. He believed that to his core. But that afternoon, as he watched Maya from across the room, something in her composure made him pause. She didn't argue. She didn't sulk. She simply carried on, polite and calm, as if even disappointment couldn't shake her. That calmness bothered him. It made him wonder, why didn't she ever defend herself? Why didn't she fight back? Was it guilt, or something else? The rain outside had grown heavier by the time the clock hit 6. Customers hurried and soaked, ordering hot drinks to escape the chill. Maya served them all with her usual warmth. She wiped the tables clean, swept the floors, restocked the syrups, and smiled at the closing crew. But her body moved slower now. Her hands trembled slightly when she lifted trays, and her eyes often drifted to the window, to the faint glow of St. Clair's Hospital across the street. That night, as Cole locked up, he noticed Maya still inside, fixing napkin holders and wiping down surfaces that were already spotless. "You can head home," he said flatly. "It's late." She looked up, startled, then smiled. "Just finishing up, sir." Her tone was respectful, almost too kind. He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded and walked out. The next morning, it happened again. The shift began at 7. At 7:10, she wasn't there. At 7:15, still no sign. By 7:20, the door finally opened, and Maya stepped in, hair damp, coat dripping, eyes tired. She whispered a soft, "Good morning," and went straight to work, hanging her bag and tying her apron as if she hadn't missed a beat. But this time, Cole didn't call her in. He didn't scold her in front of everyone. He didn't even speak. Instead, he took out another deduction form, filled it in neatly, signed it, and placed it on her counter before disappearing into the storage room for inventory. A few minutes later, Maya noticed the paper. She didn't sigh or frown. She simply picked it up, read it carefully, folded it in half, and tucked it into her apron pocket. Her fingers lingered there for a second, just long enough for someone watching to see the faintest tremor, and then she went back to work. What no one knew, not her coworkers, not even Cole, was that every morning before sunrise, Maya took a detour. Just across the street from the cafe stood St. Clair's Hospital, a white building that always smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain. Room 312, second floor, that's where her mother had been for the past 3 months, recovering from a severe stroke. Before every shift, Maya stopped there first. She arrived around 5:45 a.m., when the corridors were still quiet and the nurses changed shifts. She would walk in carrying a small thermos of homemade soup, her coat still damp from the early rain. Her mother's eyes always lit up when she saw her. "You didn't have to come this early, sweetheart," her mother would whisper weakly, smiling. But Maya always replied the same way, "You know I can't start my day without seeing you." She'd adjust her mother's blanket, spoon warm soup carefully into her mouth, wipe her hands, check the oxygen tube, and make sure her medication was in order. Sometimes her mother would fall asleep midway through their talk, and Maya would sit there quietly, tracing the lines of her mother's frail fingers. When the clock struck 7, she'd whisper goodbye, kiss her forehead and run, down the hospital stairs, across the crosswalk, through the drizzle, straight into the cafe. She never told anyone. Not because she was afraid, but because she believed her problems shouldn't become someone else's burden. To her, kindness was silent, and struggle was private. That morning, when she folded the deduction form and tucked it away, she wasn't angry. She was just tired. Tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of pretending everything was fine. She loved her job. She loved her customers. But every late mark on that sheet felt like a bruise on her dignity, a reminder that no one really saw her. Inside his office, Cole signed off on the inventory sheets. But for the first time since he joined, his pen hesitated. Through the glass, he saw her refilling the pastry case, smiling faintly at a customer, her hands steady but her shoulders slumped. And for reasons he couldn't explain, the sight made him uncomfortable. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, quietly holding her world together while his world revolved around rules and numbers. He didn't know yet, but that unease in his chest wasn't going away. Because sometimes, guilt doesn't hit when we make a decision. It hits later, when we start to realize we never stopped long enough to ask why. That Friday, the rain came harder than anyone could remember. It wasn't the kind of rain that danced lightly on windows. It fell heavy, relentless, and cold, washing the color out of the streets. Umbrellas flipped in the wind. Cars splashed through puddles that had swallowed the sidewalks. Inside Harrison and Pine Cafe, the air was thick with the sound of chatter, clinking spoons, and the steady hum of conversation. People came in soaked to the bone, shaking off umbrellas and crowding near the counter for warmth. The smell of coffee mixed with the damp scent of raincoats and wet shoes. It should have been one of the cafe's busiest, most profitable mornings. But beneath all that noise, something felt different. Maya stood behind the counter, her posture as polite and collected as ever, but the spark she usually carried, the easy laugh, the soft hum as she worked, seemed to have dimmed. Her movements were slower, more careful, as if her body was present but her thoughts were somewhere far away. When she smiled at customers, it was the kind of smile that flickered and faded before it reached her eyes. She dropped a cup once, the crash ringing louder than it should have, and for a moment, everyone turned to look. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, rushing to clean it up, her hands trembling slightly. Then, as she reached to refill the espresso machine, a burst of steam hissed unexpectedly and scalded her wrist. She flinched but didn't make a sound. Instead, she quickly ran cold water over it, wrapped a napkin around the burn, and went back to serving the next customer as if nothing had happened. To everyone else, it was just another accident in a busy morning. To Mr. Cole, watching from his glass office, it looked like carelessness. By the time the lunch crowd hit, he had lost patience. "Focus, Maya!" he snapped from behind the counter as she fumbled with an order slip. The customers glanced awkwardly at one another, sensing the tension. Maya lowered her eyes, nodded once, and replied softly, "Yes, sir." No tone, no emotion, just quiet acceptance. Outside, the rain drummed harder against the windows. The street across from the cafe blurred under the downpour, and if anyone had looked close enough, they would have seen the faint, glowing red letters of St. Clair's Hospital through the curtain of rain. But inside, No one paid attention. Everyone was too busy trying to stay dry, to get their coffee, to move on with their day. It was around noon when the door swung open, letting in a gust of cold air and a small woman in a nurse's uniform. She looked lost for a moment, scanning the crowded cafe. Her eyes were tired, not the kind of tired that came from work, but the kind that came from bad news. She hesitated before approaching the counter. "Excuse me," she said softly, "is there someone named Maya here?" Cole raised an eyebrow. "Why?" The nurse's expression faltered. It's urgent." He sighed, already irritated by the disruption, and pointed toward the back where Maya was wiping down tables near the window. The nurse nodded quickly and hurried over. Cole turned away, muttering about people bringing personal business into the workplace. But the cafe had gone strangely quiet, as if the rain itself had paused to listen. The nurse reached Maya and whispered something into her ear, too soft for anyone else to hear. Whatever she said, it was short. But in an instant, all the color drained from Maya's face. Her cloth fell from her hand. She froze, then covered her mouth, eyes wide and empty all at once. Without saying a word, she untied her apron, set it gently on the table, and bolted toward the door. "Maya!" Cole called sharply. "Where do you think you're?" But before he could finish, she was already gone, running into the storm, the door still swinging behind her. A strange silence settled over the cafe. Even the customers, unaware of what had just happened, spoke in softer voices. Eli stared at the door, his heart pounding. Something about the way Maya had left, the urgency, the fear in her eyes, didn't feel right. Cole shook his head and muttered under his breath, "Unprofessional behavior." He said it out loud, but it sounded hollow, almost forced. Deep down, he knew the tone of that nurse's voice hadn't been casual. He knew there was something more, something serious. But habit won over humanity, and he pushed the thought aside, going back to his paperwork as if nothing had happened. The hours dragged by after that. The laughter in the cafe dimmed. Even the music sounded dull. Eli handled the counter alone, and though customers came and went, the energy felt different. Heavier, quieter. Every now and then, Cole glanced at the door, half expecting Maya to return, dripping wet and apologetic. But she never did. By the time evening rolled around, the crowd had thinned. The rain still hadn't stopped. Cole sat at his desk, tapping at the calculator, balancing the register. The rhythmic sound of the machine keys echoed through the empty space. When he finally got up to lock the door, he noticed something. Maya's apron, still hanging by the wall near the back room. It was perfectly folded, as if waiting for her to return. Next to it were the 2 pay deduction forms he had given her that week, neatly placed on the shelf, untouched, unsigned. For a second, he stared at them, feeling a flicker of something he couldn't name. Regret, maybe. Then he sighed, scoffed quietly to himself, and tossed them into the trash bin. "Some people just can't handle responsibility," he muttered. He didn't know that across the street, the fluorescent lights of St. Clair's flickered softly over the ICU ward. In room 312, Maya sat still, drenched and trembling, her mother's frail hand resting in hers. The monitor beside the bed showed a flat line that refused to blink. She hadn't made it in time. Her mother's hand was still warm, but her heartbeat was gone. Maya didn't cry at first. She just sat there, frozen, the sound of the rain outside blending with the hum of hospital machines. Then slowly, quietly, her body began to shake, and tears fell onto her mother's wrist, the same wrist she'd held every morning before work. And back at the cafe, under the glow of the closing lights, Maya's apron swayed gently from the draft, as if the walls themselves knew that the person who had carried their mornings with grace would not be coming back again. The next morning, Maya didn't show up. The bell above the cafe door rang and rang with the rush hour crowd, but her soft, "good morning" never came. Her station behind the espresso machine sat empty, her apron hook bare, her name tag missing. Cole noticed immediately, though he didn't say a word. He poured himself a coffee, bitter and overbrewed, and pretended not to care. "Probably found another job," he muttered under his breath. But the words didn't sound convincing, even to him. By noon, the staff had started whispering. Eli asked quietly if anyone had heard from her. Someone said they saw her running into the rain Friday afternoon. Another mentioned the nurse who came asking for her. But no one knew anything for sure. The uncertainty hung over the cafe like fog, settling into every corner. Even the regulars noticed. "Where's Maya today?" an old man asked as he ordered his latte. Cole gave his usual short answer, personal leave, though he didn't know if that was true. When Saturday came and went without her, something in the rhythm of the cafe felt broken. The drinks came out fine, the cash register balanced, the customers smiled, but the warmth was gone. The small things that Maya used to do, like writing "Have a good day" on cup sleeves or remembering how each regular liked their foam, had vanished. The cafe ran like a machine, efficient, but soulless. Cole stayed late that night, closing alone. He wiped the counters 3 times though they were already clean, and when he finally turned off the lights, he hesitated for a moment, glancing at the door like he half expected her to walk in again, apologizing for being late. By Monday morning, an email from HR appeared in his inbox. Subject: Emergency leave. Maya Alvarez. He clicked it without thinking, expecting routine paperwork. But the first line froze him. "We regret to inform you that Maya's mother passed away late Friday evening." The words blurred for a second, the letters swimming before his eyes. He reread the line slowly, as if it would change the second time. It didn't. His throat tightened. The paper-cut precision of HR language, regret to inform, emergency leave, bereavement notice, felt so cold, so mechanical. But behind those sterile words, Cole saw flashes of Maya's face. Her tired eyes, her quiet smile, her shaking hands as she served coffee the morning her mother must have been dying across the street. He leaned back in his chair, pressing his palms against his forehead. A dull ache spread behind his eyes. The weight of it all began to sink in, the deduction forms, the harsh tone, the dismissive remarks. Every late arrival, every quiet apology now carried a different meaning. She wasn't lazy. She wasn't careless. She was just human. A daughter trying to balance grief and survival. And he, too focused on policies and punctuality, hadn't seen it. That realization didn't sit quietly. It burned. Around noon, the rain began again, a soft drizzle that mirrored the one from Friday, as if the sky itself remembered. Cole stood by the window for a long time, staring across the street at the faint red glow of St. Clair's Hospital. His reflection stared back, stiff, distant, and hollow-eyed. Then, without another thought, he grabbed his coat and stepped out into the rain. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and silence. Cole approached the reception desk, awkward in his soaked shoes and corporate posture. "I'm looking for someone," he said, his voice low. "Her name's Maya Alvarez. She works at Harrison and Pine Cafe." The nurse behind the counter looked up, recognizing the name immediately. Her expression softened. "You must be Mr. Cole," she said gently. "Maya mentioned you once." He hesitated. "She mentioned me?" The nurse nodded. "She said she hoped you'd understand one day." Cole's chest tightened. "Understand what?" Instead of answering, she reached under the desk and handed him a small brown paper bag, folded neatly at the top. "She left this here Friday morning," the nurse said. "Said she'd bring it to work later, but she never got the chance." Cole accepted it with both hands, uncertain. It was light, almost weightless, but somehow felt impossibly heavy. He sat on one of the waiting room benches and carefully opened it. Inside was a small, crumpled notebook, its cover smudged with coffee stains and fingerprints. On the first page, in neat handwriting, it read, "Ideas for the Cafe, by Maya." He flipped through the pages slowly. Each one was filled with sketches, doodles, and notes written in a rush of inspiration. New seasonal drink ideas, hand-drawn layouts for better counterflow, slogans for promotions, even little quotes like, "A good cup of coffee can fix a bad day." One page stopped him cold. It was titled, "For Mr. Cole." Underneath, she had written, "I know he's strict, but maybe he just wants us to be better. I'll show him my ideas once things at home calm down. Maybe he'll let me try one of them on the menu." Cole's throat tightened. He turned another page, a sketch of the cafe's window display, with the caption, "Make it feel like home." The irony hit hard. She had been spending her breaks not resting, not scrolling on her phone, but creating ways to make his cafe more welcoming, more successful, while he had been deducting her pay for being late. For a long while he sat there, the notebook open on his lap, the paper soft and wrinkled from her hands. The faint scent of coffee clung to the pages. The nurse walked by and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. She really cared about that place, she said softly. Even when she was exhausted, she'd talk about how proud she was of her team. Cole couldn't respond. He just nodded, his jaw clenched as he blinked hard against the sting in his eyes. When he finally left the hospital, the rain had thickened into a downpour. Each step back toward the cafe felt heavier, slower. He didn't bother with an umbrella. The paper bag, carefully folded, stayed clutched to his chest, the ink from the notebook bleeding faintly through the damp paper. As he crossed the street, the neon glow from the cafe sign reflected off the puddles. He stopped outside for a moment, watching customers through the glass, laughing, talking, sipping coffee from the very counter Maya had stood behind just days ago. Inside, everything looked the same. But he knew it wasn't. He unlocked the door, stepped inside, and walked straight to her workstation. Carefully, he set the notebook down on the counter and flipped it open to the page that read, "Make it feel like home." Then he whispered under his breath, almost to himself, "You already did, Maya. You already did." The rain kept falling outside, but inside the cafe, for the first time in a long while, Mr. Cole didn't feel the need to check his watch. 2 weeks later, the cafe door chimed softly, and for the first time in days, the staff saw a familiar figure step inside. Maya stood there, pale, thinner, but with that same gentle smile that once lit up the room. The morning crowd paused. For a heartbeat, the clatter of cups and the hiss of steam seemed to fade. Then Eli rushed forward, wrapping her in a quiet hug, followed by soft greetings and murmured condolences from coworkers and even customers who had heard what happened. Maya thanked everyone softly, her voice fragile but warm. Her eyes, though tired, held a strange calm, the kind that comes from walking through pain and finding strength on the other side. When she tied her apron once more, a few regulars at the counter clapped lightly. "Good to have you back," one of them said. Maya smiled faintly. "Good to be back." Behind the counter, Mr. Cole stood near the espresso machine, not quite knowing how to approach her. He'd spent those 2 weeks replaying everything in his mind, every curt word, every deduction form, every missed chance to notice the truth behind her silence. He'd walked past her workstation countless times, the notebook she left behind now resting in his office drawer. He had read every page of it, every idea, every scribbled note about customer experience and drink experiments. The more he read, the heavier his guilt had grown. That morning, he stepped forward slowly, holding a sealed envelope. Maya noticed him immediately and straightened, her polite smile flickering into something cautious. He cleared his throat, his voice quieter than anyone had ever heard it. "Maya," he began, "I reviewed your records." He paused, then exhaled, steadying his words. "Those deductions, they were a mistake. You shouldn't have been penalized." He held the envelope out toward her. "This is your full pay, and a bonus. I realized you've done more for this place than I ever saw." For a moment, she didn't move. The cafe noise seemed to hush again, everyone sensing something unspoken passing between them. Finally, she reached for the envelope. Her hands trembled just slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Cole," she said, her voice soft but steady. There was no bitterness in her tone, no resentment, just quiet dignity. Cole nodded, unable to find the right words. "I'm sorry," he murmured finally. "I should have listened. I should have asked." Maya smiled faintly. "Sometimes we're all just trying to survive the day," she replied. "We forget that other people are too." That single line lingered in the air long after she turned back to her work. From that day forward, things began to change. Not dramatically, not overnight, but piece by piece, like sunlight gradually filling a room that had been dim for too long. Cole called a staff meeting later that week. He stood in front of the team, hands clasped, eyes unusually humble. "I've learned something lately," he began. "We've been so focused on rules, on perfect timing and clean reports, that we forgot we're people first. Everyone's fighting a battle we can't always see. So starting now, there'll be changes. He announced a new policy, grace time. Morning shifts would have an extra 10 minutes of flexibility for arrivals. No questions, no penalties, no judgment. He added wellness breaks and encouraged open check-ins before each shift, so the team could talk, share, and support one another. But the most visible change wasn't in the schedule. It was in the cafe itself. Next to the register, right by the tip jar, Cole placed a small framed sign. It was handwritten in his neatest lettering and bordered by a tiny sketch of a coffee cup. It read, "Everyone carries a story you can't see. Lead with understanding, not judgment." Customers noticed it immediately. Some smiled, some paused to take photos, and many nodded quietly as if the words spoke to something personal. In a world rushing for perfection, that little frame became a gentle reminder of empathy. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere at Harrison and Pine changed. Laughter returned. Conversations grew warmer. Employees stayed a few minutes after closing just to talk. Even the regulars felt it. They lingered longer, tipped more generously, and often left comments about how something felt different about the place. Maya, meanwhile, had started refining the drink ideas she once kept in her notebook. Cole had asked her to lead the development of a new menu, her menu. Together, they experimented after hours, mixing syrups, testing flavors, and sketching designs on napkins. For the first time, Maya's creativity wasn't hidden between coffee orders. It was celebrated. One of her drinks, a spiced caramel latte she'd named Morning Grace, quickly became the cafe's bestseller. Customers lined up for it daily. A local blogger even wrote, "There's something about this cafe, it feels alive." Cole knew exactly what that something was. One evening, after closing, Cole watched from his office window as Maya laughed with Eli while wiping tables. The golden light from the cafe sign reflected softly on her face, and for a moment, he thought about how much she had changed, or maybe how much he had. He reached into his drawer and took out her notebook again. The last page had a small sketch, a coffee cup surrounded by a few words in her neat handwriting. "Kindness doesn't make you weak. It keeps the place warm." Cole smiled faintly. Months passed, and Harrison and Pine flourished. Profits rose, but more importantly, morale soared. Turnover dropped to almost zero. Customers became regulars, and regulars became friends. The cafe had turned into something beyond a business. It had become a small sanctuary for everyone who walked through its doors. And every time Maya stepped behind the counter, with her soft voice greeting customers and her steady hands preparing drinks, Cole felt a quiet gratitude. He never saw her as late again. Instead, he saw her as someone who had carried a world on her shoulders, and still showed up, still smiled, still gave warmth to others even when her own world had gone cold. One rainy morning, a new trainee complained about being tired. Cole chuckled softly and said, "You know, some storms are heavier than others. But showing up, even in the rain, that's where strength begins." The trainee didn't fully understand, but Maya, polishing cups nearby, met his eyes and smiled knowingly. No words were needed. The framed sign near the register caught a beam of sunlight just then, the gold letters gleaming. "Everyone carries a story you can't see." For those who worked there, it wasn't just a saying anymore. It was how they lived, one cup, one story, one act of understanding at a time. And for Cole, it was a daily reminder that leadership isn't about watching the clock. It's about watching the people who make the time worth keeping.